Thank you for your time. My name is Betula, and this is Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we're doing here. We explore human ideas, philosophies, and noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find we're prone to using adult language and expressing opinion. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything that we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes you will find it fun and interesting. We encourage you to invest time into searching out these subjects and coming to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. Slim, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, how are you?
Excellent, thanks. So today's topic of conversation is a subject that I've been fascinated with since I was like probably 8 years old, and the subject is Bruce Lee. I was very aware because I was a child of I was born in the mid-60s, so in the early 70s, that entire martial arts craze that he primarily promoted through just being who he was. He contributed significantly to it, and so I was my earliest memories of martial arts is of him, and you know that the cat. Sorry, my version, but and again because of how long ago it was. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I never understood exactly everything going on until much later. Till like it was probably until like well into the 80s when I actually started investing some time, like trying to figure out who he was and what he was all about and stuff. And so anyway, getting on with that, let's just start with. We'll just start with some of his personal details, and we'll get into his story. And then, if you have any questions or if there's anything that you'd like to contribute, just jump in. And now I know that you're aware of him, but it's more in terms of like his contribution to martial arts, right?
I know him mostly as like an iconic figure because, I mean, like you said, it's everybody knows that. There's even characters based off of him in like other stories.
His likeness, his persona has been ripped off probably more times than most celebrities, right? Because here's the weird thing: he's that unusual blend of an actor, entertainer, and martial artist, right? So you can't separate one from the other. He was all those things all at once. So he was born Li Jun-fan, and he's of course of Chinese heritage, and he was born on November 27th, 1940. So Scorpio, power to the people, and he died in July 20th, 1973. Right. So he stood 172 centimeters or 5 feet 8 inches, right? And he weighed 64 kilograms and 141 pounds. So he super interesting guy. Really didn't fit in anywhere, right? So having said that, he was born in San Francisco and he was raised in British Hong Kong, and of course, we all know him as an American, Hong Kong American martial artist and actor, and founder of Jeet Kune Do, a hybrid martial arts philosophy drawing from different combat disciplines. And he's been credited often for paving the way for the modern MMA or mixed martial arts, right?
Yeah, I can see the similarities.
Yeah, although he wasn't the only contributor, right? There were other individuals from his time period, so this is super interesting.
Yeah, isn't this? Wouldn't you refer to like Ip Man, played by Donnie Yen?
No. Yeah, no, Ip Man. The Donnie Yen is fantastic, but he's way after the fact. But he had contemporaries at his time who also contributed heavily to him borrowing from as many different systems, and because he wasn't the only one who was doing it at that time. So ultimately he created his own martial art. But the reality is that most martial artists, no matter how much they belong to any formalized system, at some point kind of deviate and reinterpret what they do. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of them who keep it in a time capsule. They preserve their martial art the way it was intended from start to finish. I never subscribed to that myself, but we'll get into that shortly. He is considered not by just some, but by most, as the most influential martial artist of all time and a pop culture icon of the 20th century, who linked East and West, particularly merging like the philosophies behind Eastern and Western ideas, right? He promoted Hong Kong action cinema, which I'm a huge fan of. I love those movies, and he also seriously contributed to changing the way that Chinese people were presented on film, particularly American films. And here's what's super interesting about him. One of his grandparents was European, I think German, right? So on his mother's side. So he was like 1/4, European, right? So it's not something that most people are commonly aware of. So he really was the bridge between East and West, right? And he's somebody who I've grown to love. Like I absolutely, everything that he did, it had such an impact on me as a child that it kind of informed a lot of my development, like well into my teens and then into my adult years and that sort of thing. So, and again, not a fanatic, just a fan, right? Now, having said that, so his time in Hong Kong, he was a child actor because his father was a well-known Hong Kong celebrity. So within, because Hong Kong had now it's, I think they're considered the premier film industry, that they're outdoing Hollywood now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard about this.
Okay.
I wasn't actually familiar with his mom's grandfather, or was it father?
I don't remember which one. It was one of his grandparents on his mom's side. Okay. That was European.
Yeah, I didn't know that fact, but I knew like he was very important to bringing his culture, or at least his own perspectives.
What it was, I think he represented the ultimate marriage of East and West, right?
He was interested in the West.
Yeah, well, he was born in San Francisco, right? Like so, and it was incidentally when his dad was touring with a Chinese opera, and so they gave birth to him. Or his mother gave birth to him in San Francisco. And actually, the name Bruce was, because his name is Lee Ju-fan, the Bruce part was actually the delivery doctor's contribution, right? So that's where Bruce came from, right?
That's interesting. I'm kind of curious why he chose that.
He didn't choose it. Like I said, it was on his birth certificate. So it would have been Bruce Lee.
Well, the doctor chose it.
Jun-fan. Who knows? Probably like Nick, naming after his father or something like that. Who knows, right? But I don't even know if it's really relevant. But Bruce couldn't be a more Western name if he tried. Right?
Yeah, it sounds like a very like Western type dude, like square jaw, tall as hell.
Well, okay, Bruce Lee wasn't necessarily tall, but he had that super square jaw. So he really is that marriage of West and East, right? So it's not a stretch then to see him as this bridge, this thing that kind of brought the world together, more closer together. And you think of that time too, right? Like that it was the end of the 60s and the early 70s, and his popularity exploded. So he was a problem child. So he was a child actor that his father got him work. He was always interested in the martial arts, and I'm not going to get into the super minutia details. If you're interested in that sort of thing, I'll give you references that you can check out on YouTube, who do a wonderful job, like detailing his like early experiences leading up to him going to North America. But ultimately, like he was the cha-cha champ in Hong Kong at that time. It would have been like in the late 50s, maybe super early, like 1960 or something like that, right? And the school that he went to was a prep school, like a Western prep school, and he beat a boxing champ in boxing. But he was also a guy who, because his father's friends, part of the Chinese opera is formal martial arts training, but it's meant to facilitate, like they have these stereotypical characters that they often will use in the Chinese opera, like the scholar, the warrior, poets, stuff like that. And then there's a very specific way in which they behave and conduct themselves while they're on stage, so that you immediately know who they are, right?
Yeah, it's like these archetypal roles.
Right.
They function super well in narrative.
Right. So his father's friends first introduced him. That's his first introduction into the martial arts, and he had other instructors as well leading up to Ip Man. Right. So, but he was a problem child. He used to get in fights all the time. So he was predisposed to it. And the lore says that it was either there were. Don't hold me to this, but I assume that it was a triad underboss or something like that. One of his kids he beat up. The local cops he beat. So then the cops, police got involved, and so at one point, and this was just before he turned 18, that they were like saying, like, he can't keep doing this, because if this keeps happening, we're gonna actually have to arrest him. So it was his mother who was saying, I'll be the guarantor, and then she was like, you got to go back to the U.S. because if you stay here, you're gonna end up in jail. So and that would have been April 1959. They sent him to the U.S. and he stayed with his older sister Agnes Lee, who was already living with family, friends in San Francisco at the time. And then in that same year, he moved to Seattle so that he could finish his high school education. And that's where he went to work for Ruby Chow as a live-in waiter in a restaurant. But that's because Ruby's husband was a good friend of his dad's, right? So they tried to set him up, like, so that maybe to avoid getting in trouble, that sort of thing, right? And then his older brother Peter joined him in Seattle before moving to Minnesota to attend college. So he wasn't like this, this transplant. His family was already established in the U.S. They already had family friends. They were connected, right? And San Francisco has a significant Chinese population, so it shouldn't surprise anybody that he was already linked, coming into this world with the West.
I
right?
assume he would have visited the West sometime with a business trip with his dad.
I don't, as far as I understand it, he never traveled to the U.S. at that time. But Hong Kong at that time, English was one of the primary languages.
Yeah,
right?
The social standard differences wouldn't be that different once he goes
right.
there if he's in a similar community there.
Right. So I mean, so for him it'd be easy for him to simply just show up in San Francisco and be able to adapt to living there, right? So
hopefully he stayed out of trouble.
Well, he gets in all sorts of. He had, again, super interesting life, and the least of which was the fighting because when he was training with Ip Man, there was a competing school, Choi Li Fu. There, I hope I said that correctly. So they were competing for a system of kung fu, and what the students would do, because you couldn't rumble in the streets, that would get you in huge trouble, and there wasn't typically place or space for them because it's super crowded in Hong Kong. So what they would do is all the rooftops were used for like, they would double as backyards and place for you to like relax and like do laundry, like have a laundry line, stuff like that. So he would get together with the Wing Chun students, and they would have fights with the Choi Li Fu students. And so, so over and above the street fights he got into and the fights in school, the guy was constantly mixing it up, right? So
at least he fought with like other systems. Like he must have learned a lot from those experiences.
well, there's no telling, right? And he never really detailed any of that stuff. I mean, he made reference to that, but we don't know specifically what went on, right? So, and again, so as much as we do know about him, there's kind of gaps in terms of, because it's just not common knowledge. But he wasn't exclusively trained in Wing Chun, and he never became a master in Wing Chun. He was just well schooled in Wing Chun, and he also studied other forms of martial arts in Hong Kong at that time through family and family friends, right? So he was already doing this hodgepodge right from the outset, right? And so I just imagine it must have fed into him like, trying to use other methodologies to apply in his martial arts. So in '59, that same year, he started to teach martial arts, and he taught, it was called Jun-fan Kung Fu. Literally, it translated as Bruce Lee's Kung Fu.
That's such a good name.
So his approach to Wing Chun, so it was really he was teaching his version of Wing Chun. And remember, he wasn't like certified teacher in Wing Chun. He's just, here he is now in the West. He's got this, he's knowledgeable and experienced in this martial art, and he starts training other people in his approach. So his first martial arts school, the Li Ju Fan Kung Fu Institute, was in Seattle, Washington, right?
So he had his own place in Seattle, like his own dojo.
Yeah, while he was working for Ruby Chow, right? So on top of that, like like most of us, like your occupation isn't who you are; it's everything you do outside of your occupation. So
how funny would it be? You're at a restaurant, you're like, "Oh my God, it's Bruce Lee. What are you doing?" He's like, "I kick ass and take dishes, and I am all out of ass."
Damn, dude, that was a horrible impression. And I don't think, although he was a badass motherfucker, and I'm sure he kicked his fair share of ass. But I don't think he ever. He may have said shit like that, but I don't. It doesn't strike me as the kind of person who would do that sort of thing, right? So anyway, and so then 2 years later, in 1961, he enrolled in the University of Washington, where he studied the dramatic arts, philosophy, and psychology. And so lots of people think that like his major when he was in university was philosophy. It was actually dramatic arts. So he's training as an actor. But remember, that's the experience he brought from Hong Kong. He actually spent a lot of time in front of the camera, like as a child star, right? So he did that from from 61 till 64, when he eventually just dropped out of university, and he moved to Oakland to live with James Yim Lee. James Lee was 20 years older and a well-known Chinese martial artist in the area, and they founded the second Jun-fan martial arts studio in Oakland, California, right? So when he started his first school, it networked him because he was training, and he was training in something. Got to remember too, this is like the early '60s. That would have seemed exotic, an exotic form of training, like Wing Chun. They'd never heard of something like that before. So then existing martial arts community in and around the West Coast of California, they would have discovered or learned about each other and stuff, and then so that common interest would have probably drawn them together to for the purposes of training, right, to better whatever it was that they were specifically doing. So like I said, so this James Yim Lee, who would have been probably like in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, and Bruce was in his like 20s at the time, right? So they became good friends, and James actually introduced him to Ed Parker. So you're going like, so what? All of this is relevant in that Ed Parker was an American martial artist, and Ed Parker invited Bruce Lee to appear in the 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships. And why is that noteworthy? Because anyone who's ever seen him do that black and white footage of him doing the 1-inch punch, it was because Ed Parker invited him to like actually, to run a demonstration of his form of Wing Chun. So it wasn't called Jeet Kune Do then, right? It was still Bruce Lee's Kung Fu, right? Jun-fan Kung Fu, right?
That's a really good way to demonstrate your martial arts. It's like, oh, it's specifically me, and if you see the video, he sends a guy pretty far back. Impressive.
He blew people away. He performed repetitions of 2-finger push-ups using his thumb and his index finger. One-handed with his feet shoulder width to demonstrate again like what he was doing in the course of his training, right? So he also performed a 1-inch punch where he was standing upright, right foot forward, his knee slightly bent, and standing in front of a stationary partner. And a stationary partner was Bob Baker. So that's somebody who's gonna much later on will come to light, and is again interesting in and of itself. His right arm was partially extended and his right fist approximately 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters away from his chest. And without retracting his arm from that position, he sent Baker backwards and fell into chairs behind him. Everyone's seen this. You've seen that where the guy hits the chair and they put the chair there as a safety precaution. He landed his ass in the chair and slid down the floor, right? So Baker recounts, so he stated it publicly, I told Bruce not to do this type of demonstration again. When he punched me the last time, I had to stay home from work because the pain in my chest was unbearable. Right? So to me, that alludes to something else, which I'm going to touch on. Dan Inosanto, who is a Filipino martial artist who became super close friends with Bruce Lee, stated publicly that how Bruce Lee started his day was through a form of meditation, right? So you start talking about his father's friends and the kind of stuff in the Chinese opera, so they were doing Tai Chi Chuan. So he was probably, which is a meditative practice, martial arts practice. So he probably had not just exposure to that, was maybe employing it. And according to Dan Inosanto, that's how he began his training day. So the idea of the 1-inch punch, we talked about this the last episode when we talked about Qigong, Qi, and Dan Qian. And the martial form of that meditative practice was Neigong, and or Neijing. So in the Neigong, maybe he learned the song, or how to loosen or unleash that energy, and maybe that's why he was able to do that 1-inch punch and do it to the degree and the effectiveness that he did, unless you think Bob Baker was like faking it and he just jumped backwards after he got pounded on the chest. But clearly he made a very public statement talking about like how painful of an experience it was. So again, you can read into it all you want, but my suspicions were that that's what he may have been doing. Now, I can't confirm or deny that. To me, it just seems like a likely way of explaining where the 1-inch punch came from, right? Because we know from that the study of Neigong, which is martial application of energy practices, that maybe he was able to create explosive action with a minimum amount of Li. And remember, Li's the mechanical energy the body generates when you're punching and kicking, right? It's the physical mechanics of fighting. And he wasn't using the physical mechanics of fighting. He was using energy, if you want to buy into that.
Even if he didn't use energy and he was using Li, like physical, mechanical force, to go from 1 inch like into the guy's chest and goes flying back, that's still like incredible feat.
Right, and I don't think that, part of me, because all the years that I've been doing it, part of me is wondering, could you generate that much force over the distance of 1 inch? Boxers can produce, and it's been well measured, up to like a really, really well conditioned and practiced boxer can produce about a ton of force generating a punch, but they're using their whole body to generate that punch. It's not them just straightening out their arm. And what he did was he had a bent elbow, and from that position and a slightly bent wrist, and then he would collapse or straighten out the arm and extend it into a punch. I don't know that mechanically you could produce that kind of force over 1 inch distance, and his whole body didn't contribute to it. It was just his arm. So was it him applying Neigong? I don't know. It's to me it's an interesting question because of the nature of the 1 inch punch. So I spent so I don't know if it's clear by now, but I spent a lot of time thinking about it. Right. So anyway, getting ahead of ourselves. So then in 1964 at the championships, he at the Taekwondo championships, he met Master Jun Ri. So I hope I said that correctly. I apologize if I butchered your name. He developed a friendship, and they benefited as martial artists. Ri taught the side kick in detail to Bruce, and then Lee taught Ri the non-telegraphic punch. Right? So here's just an interesting insight. So when they would engage in a fight, they wouldn't do it like MMA, come out of a corner at each other. They'd stand in front of each other and cross hands, right? So they cross hands at the wrist. So that's handshaking distance. So that's at handshaking distance, you're in the space of personal combat. So that's how they would start their fights. They wouldn't start it coming from like corners coming in at each other. They'd cross hands, and then they'd start, as soon as they crossed their hands, then that would be the beginning of the fight, right? So anyway, and Bruce Lee was super effective using the side kick. It wasn't the only kick that he was effective at, but as a result of training with Jun Ri, he was able to place some time in developing like the side kick, which was again a Taekwondo move, which kind of exists in karate and stuff, and typically wasn't associated with Wing Chun. But Wing Chun has its own version of their kind of like a front kick, so it's interesting how you can see at that time. So in the early '60s, he's integrating and cross training with other people who are really experienced at whatever their particular system of martial arts, right? So then at that same time in Oakland, Chinatown, in 1964, he had a controversial private match with a man named Wang Jackman, right? And so who was a direct student of Ma Qinfeng, known for his mastery of the Jing Quan, right, which refers to, Jing refers to shape, and Yi refers to the mind or intent, and Quan fist. So you could almost translate it as mind fist, right? And it denotes a method of unarmed combat or boxing or fist method. So the Jing Yi Quan is commonly referred to as mind form or mind intention boxing, and it's a northern Shaolin Tai Chi kind of thing, right? So the Chinese community of Oakland issued an ultimatum to him to stop teaching or to stop teaching non-Chinese people martial arts. So true to who he was, he of course refused to comply, and he was challenged to a combat match arranged that if he lost, he would have to shut down his school, while if he won, he would be free to teach anyone. So now if you listen to Juan Jackman, because after it had happened, Juan Jackman and somebody else from the Chinese community stated that, like, formally, that like there was a 20-minute kind of bout and stuff like that, but according to Bruce Lee and Linda Lee Cadwell and James Yim Lee, the fight lasted a mere 3 minutes, with a decisive victory by Bruce, and he chased the guy down, the motherfucker down, and he got on top of him and he screamed at him, do you submit, do you yield, while he was like pummeling the guy, right? So much for that. But like I said, for Juan Jackman, he did damage control and tried to suggest that that it was a 20-minute bout, which he acknowledged that he lost to him. But it was a seminal moment for Bruce Lee, that 3 minutes that it took for that to happen. He was like, one, physically I could have been better prepared, and two, it took too long. 3 minutes was too long, right? So there's the, that's the legend or the story. So that was the impetus it was the impulse then for him to get more deeply into the martial arts and then reconsider how to approach his fighting, which, remember, leading up to that moment, he was already integrating other methodologies and stuff. So I think all that did for him was incite him to do more, not less, right? It became the beginning of that like intensive training regime that became like his life, right? So then, so that was in '64 when that occurred, and so then 1966 to 1967, he played Kato alongside the title character, the Green Hornet, who's played by Van Williams, in the TV series produced and narrated by William Dozier. So William Dozier was the guy who has seen his performance at Ed Parker's karate championship, his demonstration that he gave, and saw something in him, right? So this was his first like foray into like acting in the West, right?
I think one of the most important parts for him is like this is a role he could play and be taken seriously. Like to represent his people was very important to him. But having this character was going to be awesome because not only
I don't think he thought like that. I think he was thinking about a paycheck. Because if anything, like a lot of the stuff that's attributed to him, he had an awareness of, but I don't think that's what drove him. He was drove by practical concerns, but his primary concern was training, right?
Well, he at least found that opportunity to showcase, like, even though he's the sidekick, he's the one jumping around the room kicking ass.
Yeah,
like,
but dude, he dominated the screen. He basically stole every scene he was in, right? In Hong Kong, when the reruns of the Green Hornet they used to call it the Kato Show.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that actually.
Right. So anyway, and it only ran for a single season, but back then, a single season of television was 26 episodes. Right, and think about Netflix and all that crap today, and what are they doing, like 10, 12 episodes for a season? Now, granted, maybe it has something to do with budget constraints because of how expensive it is to produce some of this stuff, because a lot of it's so high end. But the fact of the matter is, I would like I would like Hollywood more, or all those enormous, megalithic filmmaking institutions, if they did 26 episodes of television. I would love to see Strange New Worlds have 26 episodes. Do you know what I'm talking about? Star Trek, Strange New Worlds?
I'm not sure if I've seen this one.
Doesn't matter. But it's probably, in my opinion, one of the best Star Trek series, and it's just a new one. So anyway, I'm getting far afield. So in September 1966 to March 1967, he also appeared as Kato with the Green Hornet in 3 separate crossover episodes with Batman and Robin. I used to love the Adam West Batman and Robin, right? So again,
this is the one that was televised. It was kind of campy, but they played into it for fun.
Right, yeah, exactly. This is one and the same. So, and I have very distinct memories of being in my grandmother's basement. So it was like a semi-detached, so then my grandparents lived on one side and we lived on the other side. And I remember having very specific memories of hanging out in my grandmother's basement with a glass of milk, 2 slices of bread with peanut butter, watching the Green Hornet and Batman and Robin. And why I watched Batman and Robin, because I was waiting for the episodes with Kato. Right, so again, this is some of my earliest memories, right? So I would have been maybe 5 years old, right? 5, 6 years old at the time.
That must have really grabbed your attention, like as a kid listening to Bang, Zip, Hey, Robin.
What? And then just
what's his name? Kato jumping around, like yelling, like
dude,
energy driving.
Just blew me away, right? I was so just so enamored with it, going like, shit, I want to do that. Right? So can you imagine, right? So anyway, so then while he was doing the Green Hornet series, he met Ivan Judo Jean LaBelle. And so Jean LaBelle was a well-known judo grappler, but he was also a mixed martial artist. And Jean LaBelle very publicly stated that if Bruce Lee was the father of mixed martial arts, then he was the great-grandfather of mixed martial arts, right? And it was well warranted. Jean LaBelle was not somebody to be taken lightly. He was a fucking monster, right? He was an American judoka, stunt performer, actor, and professional wrestler, nicknamed the Godfather of grappling. Right, he popularized grappling in professional fighting circles, a precursor to the modern MMA. Right, so he's the one who brought grappling and then striking, blend them together. Right, so and he and Bruce became fast friends, and they cross-trained together all the time. Right, and Jean LaBelle always spoke highly of Bruce Lee, but he often said, the guy's like 5'8" and 140 pounds, like. And then that'd be the end of it, right? But he also very publicly stated that how exceptional physical ability that Bruce Lee had, like that he was just astounding. Remember, this guy was jumping 6 feet up in the air and delivering kicks. So those hanging lights, he would kick the lights out. So you go like the guy was getting like airtime, like Jordan.
Michael Jordan airtime.
Yeah, he's getting the same kind of airtime.
Yeah, and he messes up your lights too.
Yeah.
Like, what an abrasive guy.
Right. So he worked on Judo Jean LaBelle also, and he's noteworthy, right? So I do want to just comment that he worked on over 1,000 films and TV shows, and he authored 12 books, right, on the subject of martial arts, and he passed in 2022. He was the United States Jiu-Jitsu Federation promoted LaBelle to the 9th Dan in Jiu-Jitsu, and then 2004, and that was in 2000, and then in 2004, the World's Martial Arts Masters Association promoted him to 10th degree, right? So this is, and then then the Judo Federation did the same thing in 2005. They promoted him to 9th degree. So these are, like, this is a guy, it was acknowledgement of the guy's contribution to the world at large in terms of martial arts, his contribution to martial arts. And it's well warranted. Jean LaBelle was astounding. Jean LaBelle acted very cautiously when dealing with Steven Seagal. But the only reason why I bring this up, the rumor mills, if you listen to the rumor mills, Seagal tried to, like, I guess impose himself or tried to impress himself upon LaBelle. LaBelle was, like, very smart. He knew that, like, but if he messed with this dude, that it might have a very negative effect on his career. So he was very careful about how he conducted himself. But the rumor mill says that the two of them got into a grappling thing, and Jean LaBelle laid this, like, technique on him, like it had him all twisted in knots, and he shit his pants. The Steven Seagal ended up shitting his pants. Now, it's just rumor, right? It's it's unsubstantiated, but it's the super funniest thing that you could think of, right? Like,
no way, man! Steven Seagal beats everybody. He's the world's greatest.
I've
heard this story too, and I cried laughing.
Dude, don't get me wrong. I loved Steven Seagal movies, especially in the 80s. Like, that first 5 or maybe 6 movies he did, they were fucking great. Great martial arts movies, right? Like, and and whether any of that is true or not true, I don't care, right?
Just imagine it. Just imagine if it's true. It's so funny. He gets flipped over and you're, oh no.
Should have wore your brown pants.
He's shuffling away his old ponytail and leather jacket.
Yeah, so anyways, so like I was saying, Jean LaBelle and Bruce Lee became really super good friends, and they trained together and exchanged, what they knew. So this is him, again, adding to the arsenal that was Jeet Kune Do, or his methodology, which was really, when you listen to Dan Inosanto talk about it, it's not a series of technical skills. It's more of an approach to training and how to conduct yourself in a fight. And then what you do is you borrow tools from as many different systems that are out there to allow for you to facilitate a victory in any kind of physical confrontation.
You're mentioning he learned how to do the side kick, front kick, but he did it in a way that it didn't show.
Well, there was Wing Chun has a very specific kind of front kick, but I was a what was his name? He was the Taekwondo guy. Jun-gu Ri, who helped him, like, develop his sidekick in terms for effectiveness. And I don't know how well versed you are in kicking, but a side kick is a super effective way to deliver a kick.
Oh, I was just speaking to, like, knowing to fight in a way where it doesn't show off what your next move is. I forget what the word was.
Yeah, you're not. Oh shit!
It's not like choreographed.
No, I know what you're saying, but you're not. You're not. Shit. It's where you're not giving an indication of what you're going to do next, right? So there's a single word that escapes me now.
But things like that are really interesting because you see his way of fighting is like, don't be detectable, move. Like,
you talk about So it's not telegraphing
that's
your movements, right? So
but it's both that and his idea of, like, there's no in between time when you throw a punch. You have to be here and then there.
Well, he cycled. His most interesting thing is that, and again, it's part and parcel of, like, Wing Chun, but also because he used Western boxing techniques, right? Like the jab, cross, hook, uppercut. So these are super effective punches, right? Like, every martial artist should have them in their arsenal. It doesn't matter if you're primarily a grappler, you should know how to use them. Because, again, in that personal space, once you get the advantage on your opponent, you should press the advantage. That means cycling through a multitude of the techniques. You don't rely on one thing. It's not like one hit, one down.
Yeah.
That happens, but it's super rare.
Yeah, like I hear from a lot of fighters that there's never one person that's amazing at one skill and it topples everybody. Because if you think about like someone who does strictly ground game, you have to start in a striking position in MMA or a street fight. Chances are like you want to win while you're standing.
Okay, so what I often hear from grapplers is they'll be like 90% of confrontations end up on the ground, and it's a statistic that they borrow from the police, because police don't want to engage in hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
So then what they do is they grapple with the person and wrestle them to the ground. So they took this statistic from policing and then applied it to say that, again,
Right.
not to speak ill of grappling. Grappling's super effective techniques, and you can employ it effectively, but it's only assuming that the other person is a willing participant. And if you break with the contact, like if you simply just stand up and refuse to grapple, they got to get up, right? And I don't know how much fight experience you have, but if you end up on the ground, whoever your opponent is and his friends, they'll start kicking you. So being on the ground is, in my experience, it's not a safe bet. You're placing yourself at enormous risk. But that's street fighting, right?
I don't know specifically about Bruce Lee's styles that he's
Well,
incorporated.
he incorporated a lot of the grappling.
Well,
Like he borrowed heavily from Jean LaBelle.
Yeah,
right?
I was just gonna say, like, when it comes to his overall preference of fighting, like, I don't know if
I don't
likes
think he
being on
had,
ground.
for him, he didn't have a preference. It was whatever was most effective, given the what he was confronted with at any given moment in the course of a confrontation, right? So his fighting didn't stop, you know, as an actor and stuff. It just it took on a different air. Right, and we're not going to get in, again, not into the super details of it, but I will recommend YouTube channels that you can go to that will, in explicit detail, and they're accurate, tell you about like all the fights he got into while he was filming, because he did 5 major film productions, and during those productions there were moments of where he ended up getting into fights with the people in production and stuff like that, right? So anyway, having said that, getting back to what he favored, his was more of an approach to fighting, and whatever worked is what worked, and that you needed to that as a martial artist you needed to train in a wide diversity of techniques. Right, and you need to have that in your bag of tricks that you need to be able to present, with techniques that were suited for whatever it was that you were being confronted with. Right, makes sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
His entire philosophy. You ever see The Game of Death?
No.
It's one of his movies. So he basically fights his way up this pagoda to get to the to the big boss fight at the end, and at each floor he's confronted with a different type of fighter who presents with different types of techniques, and it's ultimately about being adaptive enough that you're able to deal with anyone regardless of what their technical standing is. Right.
There's one dude just on one floor who refuses to get up. He's like, "Come over, man."
You got it, because Game of Death unfortunately he had died. I know, so only had finished filming so much of it, but that entire sequence where he works his way up the pagoda to fight the big boss at the end, that they filmed, so you can see that on YouTube anytime. And again, super interesting. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is one of his opponents because he was one of his students from the U.S.
Didn't he have that Kill Bill suit on during that fight?
Yeah, he did. It's not the Kill Bill suit.
It looks
okay.
similar.
Let's to be clear. That Kill Bill suit. Remember, we were saying that he was most ripped off. That entire Kill Bill suit came from the suit that the jumpsuit he wore in Game of Death.
Oh, I thought it was the other way around for a minute.
Dude, it was 1973. When did Kill Bill come out?
I wouldn't know it, dude. I'm like
20 years ago, late 90s.
Oh. Okay.
you thought it was from the 70s? I should give you a slap. Off camera, of course.
80s, 50s, what is it to be?
Well, again, I would say it's relevant stuff that's worth knowing. So since we're talking about the movies that he made 5 feature-length Hong Kong martial arts films in the early 70s. The first one was Low Ways, The Big Boss, 1971. Love that movie. Number 2 was Fist of Fury, 1972. And then number 3 was the Golden Harvest film, The Way of the Dragon, 1972. So love that movie. And that's Chuck Norris was. It's that famous fight in the Colosseum, the Roman Colosseum. That's where that occurred, right? And it was directed and written by Bruce Lee himself. So, and then number 4 was the Golden Harvest. And it was the first time the Hong Kong cinema and Hollywood, Warner Brothers, together worked to create Enter the Dragon, which was 1973. And then The Game of Death, which was unfinished, but then they did this super schlocky, creepy kind of thing where they used a substitute actor and it's so cringy. But they finished the movie without him and using body doubles and then weird techniques to use his face and stuff like that. And both of those were directed by Robert Klaus, right? So, but it didn't come out until 1978. After his death, there was all sorts of Bruce exploitation martial arts movies, and a lot of Hong Kong. They all tried to cash in. There was like guys, Bruce Lai, Bruce Low, like and a lot of the performers who you could tell when you watched those movies that they were mimicking him. They weren't at all him. And it's not to say that they weren't good actors or they weren't capable martial artists, but you could tell it was somebody mimicking somebody else.
Well, the thing about being so iconic is they go after the icon. It's not the person that they really see, which is like tough.
I think it's more about like the energy he brought to on camera. If you see any of his on
People
camera,
are drawn to it. Yeah.
Yeah, man, the guy exude. He had this energy about him that like drew people in, and his movies like always did that. Like, there's some people who talk about his time in Hong Kong as being like really not the best time, even though that's where he was really where his fame took off as a result of that. But he had his family there. He was isolated from all his friends, because the best time just strikes me from all the stuff I've ever read and the biographies about him that his best time was just before all the fame, when he was cross-training with all these super interesting people, so it would have been the mid to late 60s, and that entire martial arts community on the West Coast in California, to him, it was a fertile breeding ground for interesting ideas related to martial arts. And he was a guy who was well-read. Like, it's not an accident he was into philosophy, right? Like, so all of that stuff contributed to set him up for that kind of, that fame and stardom. But unfortunately, like all that stuff, it has its downside, right? So anyway, we'll get into that momentarily. But as a result of that, he became an icon across the world. Even to this day, there's still, isn't there's some guy out in an Iranian kind of, or Bruce Lee wannabe that like actually looks
That's-
like he does. But like this is how influential the guy is. 50 years after he died, and he's still creating. There's people who are emulating him and borrowing from him heavily. He inspired me to get involved into the martial arts. And I was like, my first foray into martial arts, I was 16. I was so lazy, just a terrible student. So Hung Gar style of Kung Fu. And I was just, like I said, a terrible student, just shitty.
I know what hunger is. I don't know what hunger is.
Just a particular style of like Kung Fu, right? So anyway, and it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I kind of, because by then I cultivated serious discipline as a result of 3 years in the military. And then, so then when I got out of the military, I just gravitated towards it and I ran with it. And then even though I had a good awareness and I read some books about him leading up to it, it wasn't until I was like into my mid-20s when I became super serious about it. And then, like I said, like driven in much the same way that he was driven. Like what I wanted to do is just cultivate the greatest martial arts skill that I was capable of doing. But again, it was because the lessons I learned in the military, that there's no physical limitation that you can't overcome.
Sorry if this is a long form question, but I gotta ask, because I hear a lot of the times people talk about Bruce Lee as like somewhat aggressive, bombastic character, but still caring and kind. And that sounds like it's conflicting, but if you look at what if he was doing all these movie roles, he's being outspoken just for the ability to have financial stability, produce like gyms and his own method to bring martial arts everywhere. Like, what if he used movies as a caveat? Or not a caveat, catalyst.
Movies for him was a way to achieve his material success, right? So, and he clearly states that because he had a certain level of expectation, wanted to be able to provide for his family, but not just subsistence level existence. He wanted to be able to have an abundant lifestyle, and part of that. Imagine being around A-list celebrities all the time. So many of them were his students, but he's not at that A-list level. And this is the late '60s, early '70s, and and he's non-white. In an institution, Hollywood was dominated by white actors. I mean, and again, not to turn this into a racial card or anything like that, but or a commentary on race.
Actually, can I add something about that? I think it's significant that he did this, and it was so beneficial because, in a way, he could represent his community in a lot of traditional Western films.
When you say his community, but there was a portion of him that was Western, so his community was
people who like martial arts. That's what I'm saying. Like,
to me, he was the amalgamation of East and West, and literally. So he was, born in the West, had some Western heritage or lineage, and genetically speaking, he really was this bridge. So to me, he was a guy who was he was living. Here's the thing about him. He was truly a martial artist and an advocate of fitness. He was conscious of diet, all this stuff. He had a super awareness of way before it became popular in mainstream culture, right? He was one, again, not the only one, but he's some of the first people who were training to like that seriously, and they were looking at like, technical training's not enough. You need to have your fitness game has to be up, so that's a separate form of training, and then diet so that you're fueling the machine so it can sustain that level of activity. He was ahead of the curve, but he wasn't the only one. He, like I said, remember, he came out of that community where they were all doing that. They were creating gear that didn't exist to be able to like be able to, like, train and stuff, like, hand pads and gloves and all that sort of stuff that now we take for granted. It's commonplace, but he was part of the innovators that first introduced that stuff, at least in the West here, particularly in the late 60s, right? So
wasn't he one of the first people that would like almost daily hit the heavy bags? Just not
yeah,
even
no, I don't know.
punches.
I don't know the specifics of his training regime. I just, because for me, I was driven. When I approached it, I was like, technical training's one thing, and you need to seek out. I tried to do the same thing living here. So I have friends who are masters in karate and other karate systems outside of Wei Chi Ru, which is the system that of karate that I followed. I knew guys who I've known and trained with guys who do Wing Chun. I made close friendships with them, and because I was seeking interesting ways of training that were outside of the system that I already was, trained or experienced in. I saw it. I did like eskrima, like I just. To me, it's made the most sense, but I never neglected physical conditioning. Physical conditioning was separate. So, because if you wanted to create fantastic, present in a fantastic way your technical skills, you needed to have a really well-trained and well-conditioned body. So that means like awareness of strength, how to train for strength. So meant for me to become knowledgeable, to learn how to do those things and then how to employ those things. When my life was absolute shit and I was personally in a terrible place, the thing I turned to was training to try and keep me from falling apart. Endless katas, endless like drilling, like punching, kicking drills, like seeking more information, pushing my body, because to me that was the only thing that kind of kept me together, right? And it was horrible, man. I hated how I felt, but I always felt good when I trained. So no surprise, I just kept throwing myself at the training, right? So I built a life around it. So I paralleled what he did, but I did it because for me it was a way to kind of deal with the fallout of marriage ending and all the horrible things that come with that, and so for me it became this method of personal salvation, right? So then what I really understood was it was my purpose. So still to this day, I don't train to the degree that I used to, but it's mostly because I don't have the availability of time, right? And physical issues notwithstanding and stuff, but I still train. I still train regularly, and I don't look at a day and go, nothing to do. No, I have a Wing Chun dummy I beat the crap out of. Actually, it beats the snot out of me. But I regularly, because I know the dummy form, so I use my Wing Chun dummy. I still train in katas. I still do punching and kicking drills. I still do weapons training. To me, that's fun. It's what I love to do. So I don't ever get away from that. And nothing irritates me more than when I can't do that. Then I become a bear. And in terms of like Bruce Lee's personality, he was a human being. He was just as richly flawed as the rest of us. And he self-confessed he had a temper, right? And I've heard some people refer to him as an asshole, but I'm like, so what? Show me a fucking person who doesn't behave in a less than ideal way. Come on. I go, this is the problem with deifying somebody like him. So I like the fact that he's a human being, because, and here's why, specifically why. Because everything he was capable of doing, he wasn't this outlier, super exceptional guy that only he could do it. He demonstrates clearly that anyone can do it. Just got to show up and do the work. but nobody wants to fucking do the work, right? Everybody wants to be an armchair fucking martial artist and talk about like, oh, how knowledgeable they are. Go fucking put your money where your fucking mouth is. Go to a class, right? Instead of sitting there and freely expressing my opinion. That's completely invalid because you don't train.
Hey, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned earlier you might provide links to like.
I'm gonna mention them later, but there's because there's still a bunch of information I want to cover, but
Okay.
I'm not quite done talking about again about treating him as a human being, and that's what makes him a greater icon. It's not that now that he's like this this perfect person and this perfect hero. He's not. He's flawed. He's like us. Therefore, then you can be like him.
Yeah, that's why I like the most, because if you think about somebody who could do something like he does, it's like you need a lot of self-control. And it seems like people who train actually do develop better sense of self-control and timing.
They become disciplined, right? So then, and again, no limitation can prevent you from growing and developing as a person, and not just martial arts skills, but across the board. And so that's what it is. It's a recognition of that. He lived it. He breathed it. Occupationally, he was an actor, but that's what he did for fucking money. He was a martial artist, like always, right? And he was driven. I like that. To me, that resonates with me in a very deep way. And like I said, here, this individual who I don't know, I only know as a result of pop culture and everything that I learned about him throughout the course of my life, and how much that endeared him to me. And then I was like, shit, if he can do it, I can do it. So it always drove me. So, whether or not that's meaningful or anything, who cares? So I honor what he did by doing the same sort of thing that he did, but I do it in my way, right? I'm not trying to mimic him or be him. He set the example. Now I'm living up to the example. And my whole life has been built around that, right? So I don't apologize for it, right? Because I'd rather be doing the martial arts all the time than showing up at a shit fucking minimum wage job. Right, so I can have a subsistence level of existence. Fuck that.
It's funny, even as being a waiter, doing that just trying to make money to live. He was also training in martial arts, doing all these things, because I would feel someone with his perspective would find that you need meaning. You do need to find something out there. There's exploration out there.
Right, exactly. So I define the purpose as self-mastery, and I didn't come to that realization out of thin air. It was a result of like seeing what he did. So you could say that his entire life demonstrates a life of purpose where self-mastery is the focus, and it produces astounding results, especially if you're disciplined and you're serious and you show the fuck up. Do the work.
This is why a lot of people are iconic in history.
Right.
They're just like 100% for the thing.
Right. And so I'm like, everybody can do that. Everyone can do that. Right? But most of us don't want to. Why? Because you'd rather be distracted. Why? Because it's easier. You have no problem working at a disadvantage for someone who's going to leverage the fact that you need access to material resources and spend your entire life chasing a paycheck and then distraction, rather than committed to a life of purpose. And to me, the purpose is self-mastery. He exemplified that.
One thing that really upsets me is when my friends say like, oh, I'm finally done work, I can relax. It's like, no, you have the only time you have left right now before you have to go back to work. Eat shit, shave, and fucking do what you love. It's rewarding. It makes it worthwhile.
It's that point that I always try to make. So I live and breathe it. Right? To me, this is the way. Right?
That's a callback. We should add that to the description. It would fit in really well.
Yeah, but again, it shouldn't surprise anybody to hear me say it. I think I've mentioned it a number of occasions, right? So, anyway, it's super interesting. Like I said, I'm still to this day fascinated by the guy. I watch Bruce Lee's movies. I watch them all at least once every 2 years. Like I do it over the course of 2 years. I'll watch all 5 of them, right? And when I go through Game of Death, I actually fast forward through all the cringy stuff. I just right, but I do. I watch them kind of regularly, not like, a couple times a year, but like over the course of 2 years, I'll see all 5 of them at least once, right? But to be fair, I love watching John Carpenter's The Thing. So, and I do that every winter only because it's super creepy, trapped in Antarctica, aliens, all that good stuff, right? So anyway, I'm getting far afield. So getting back to Bruce Lee and humanizing Bruce Lee. When he died, his death was a result of him having a serious allergic reaction to a component of a common, headache medication. So when he did die, he was at the home of his colleague Betty Ting Pei, who's a Taiwanese actress, allegedly waiting for Raymond Chow and George Lazenby. George Lazenby was actually one of the James Bond actors, and I think in a single James Bond movie. So allegedly they were waiting so that they could discuss. I think it was for Game of Death, right? And he complained of a headache, and then Ting gave him a painkiller Equagesic, which contained both aspirin and tranquilizer meprobamate, right? And I think it's the meprobamate. It's a super rare allergy, and he suffered from it, right? And anyway, Lee died from the allergic reaction to the tranquilizer, and leading up to his passing, while he was filming and doing post-production work on Enter the Dragon, he was experiencing fainting spells. So that might have been a result of because it's very hot in Hong Kong, particularly during the summertime, lots of humidity, that sort of thing. Intense working schedule, training, all that stuff, and then might have been producing headaches, and he started taking the stuff unknowing that it's going to have a significant allergic reaction, and it did. His brain swelled considerably. That's what eventually killed him, right? So just as a side note, have you ever heard of Sadhguru? Okay, Sadhguru, spelled Sadhguru. You'll find him all over YouTube. He's an Indian guru. He's actually made quite a name for himself here in the West. He has a great following. And he clearly states in one of his videos that, I'm going to go back to what we were talking about, like that Bruce Lee may have, based on what Dan Inosanto said about him using a form of meditation, and my suspicion is that it was some form of Neigong that gave him the capacity to do the 1-inch punch in the explosive kind of way that he did. Sadhguru commented that when you start using those methods of meditation and you start having these evolved energy-based experiences, that you're not supposed to be demonstrating them, and then when you do so, and again, you can read into this as much as you want, that he stated, and he states it clearly in one of his YouTube videos, that the reason he died was a result of him openly using those energy-based abilities in a public way, right? So that's why it was the consequence of doing that, because I guess in the grand scheme of universal energy, that's a no-no.
Something like this was actually referenced in a really popular 90s or 2000s show. There's these things called inner gates, and you can probably guess it's to activate flow chi throughout your body. And the more gates you open, essentially, the more physical and physical and spiritual damage you take on. And
Well, I don't, because I'm somebody who's a regular meditator and I've been doing it for a long time. I've never experienced any of these sort of things.
I'm just saying it's interesting. Like it's referenced in other cultures
Well,
originally.
okay, so again, so you ever heard of RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan?
Yeah, I was like RZA. I don't know that Chinese.
No, okay,
whatever.
so
It's like RZA.
yeah, so RZA in a documentary about Bruce Lee stated that he thought Bruce Lee was a minor prophet whose purpose for being here was to link East and West, right? You know, super interesting about Bruce. Even though we're talking about his death, I want to go back to his youth. He took the Chinese stage name as Lee the Little Dragon. He was born in both the hour and the year of the dragon, according to the Chinese zodiac. So he literally was the dragon, right? And if you buy into what RZA thinks, that maybe the whole point and purpose of his existence was to link us all together, East and West.
Did you say day and year?
The hour that he was born and the year that he was born were of the dragon.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. And he had this famous life.
Right, and his stage name when he was a child actor was Lee the Little Dragon. And then his greatest movie, Enter the Dragon.
I feel like that's something that was intentionally chosen.
Well, of course, but it just, again, it speaks to, like, if you want to buy into like any kind of mysticism with regards to him, I don't. I like Bruce Lee as a human being that was flawed and not any different than us, because then he clearly demonstrates that. Or what you can infer from that is that then we could be like him, that you could achieve that level of competency.
Right. He's the little rabbit of martial arts. He's the Eminem of Bruce Leeing.
Right, something like that. So, getting back to his death. So, when they did an autopsy, they did find trace amounts of THC in his system, but the person who did the autopsy said that it had nothing to do with his death, and it'd be irresponsible to somehow try and equate it, that somehow it impacted him living or dying, right? So you can take that from that what you will, right? So can you imagine, like, because I have a vague recollection of, like, when he died, it was just like everybody talking about it. But I would have been about 8 years old when that happened, right? So Lee's body was because his wife was like, we're going back to Seattle, right? Because that's when he was happiest. Like, that entire time along the west coast of California is when, when he was struggling, seemed like the time that was, for him personally, the best time, right? Because it's where he was in the midst of his personal evolution, all these great things were going on, had all this fantastic cross-training with all these fantastic other martial artists. So at the time of his death, once they allowed for the people of Hong Kong to have their moment, Linda Lee Cadwell, his wife, basically was like, we're going to bury him in the Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, right? So the pallbearers at his funeral on July 25th, 1973 included Taki Kimura, who was one of those guys that I was talking about, like martial artists, who was also a super close friend of Bruce Lee's and one of his students, Steve McQueen, who I'm sure you don't know, but he was the king of cool, Hollywood icon. All the 80s action movies are a result of Bullet and Steve McQueen. James Coburn, Dan Inosanto, who's a Filipino guy who's, again, super close friend of Bruce Lee's. They trained together. Bruce brought him to play some parts in his movies. Peter Chin and Lee's brother Robert. Around the time of Lee's death, numerous rumors appeared in the media. Lee's iconic status and untimely death fed many rumors and theories. I remember in 1983 when I was in high school, everybody talking about like, oh, he's going to return 10 years after his death, like that he disappeared, right, because the triads were out together. Oh, just the kind of stuff the rumor mill generated was just mind-blowing, right? But I remember distinctly being aware of that because again, all the wannabe martial artist kids or the guys who like to watch martial arts movies were virtually every guy. They were all talking about this, but again, it was just the rumor mill, right? So Bob Baker, remember the guy who ate that 1-inch punch and went flying, right? He was a student of Bruce Lee since like 1962, so they were tight, and in fact, in the movie The Fists of Fury, Bob Baker played the strongman villain who's a karate expert, Petrov, right? And they were super tight from Bruce Lee's time, since his time in Los Angeles. Now, this is the kind of stuff, it's kind of controversial, but it's not untrue. Allegedly, Bob Baker was the alibi for the affairs and the drug supplier and smuggled drugs into Hong Kong for not just Bruce, but Bruce's wife, Linda Lee Cadwell. And we know this to be true because there were letters that were released from the Bob Baker estate. And there was an auction of Bob Baker and Bruce Lee memorabilia, and part of the auction were these drug letters. So the time that he was in Hong Kong, where he and his wife would write these letters to Bob Baker, and there are over 50 letters, and asking him to bring an assortment of drugs to Hong Kong. Now you got to remember the time. Right, this Bob Baker guy, if he would have got pinched, it would have never seen the light of day. Right. So anyway,
with a name like Bob Baker, like you kind of figure he's cooking something up.
Right. Well, he was a martial arts guy who became super tight with them. And again, you think about it, they're running around with A-list celebrities, and it's Hollywood, like. It goes hand in hand with that, right? Like, so, and again, I don't fault him or judge him because of it. I just, like, here, it humanizes him. If anything, it shows him to be that, guess what? He's just as flawed as the rest of us, right? So, and if you want really detailed accounts of that, go to the YouTube channel, The Kung Fu Genius, and Bruce Lee's Drug Letters. So that's what you'll do the search for, and you'll get a deep dive into that. Another really good channel that highlights a lot of accurate information with regards to Bruce Lee is Golden Bell Training. And the episode is Lost Letters Reveal Shocking News About Bruce Lee. Right, so the content of these letters cover life and career aspirations, recovery from back injuries, and so it wasn't just like about drugs. It was everyday stuff. But then there'd be a part where they'd be, where they'd talk about smoking marijuana, dropping acid, doing cocaine, right? And Bruce within these letters talked about quitting. So in his defense, because of the distraction from training. Right? So he had an awareness, and had he not succumbed to the allergic response, my personal feeling is he would have just gotten away from it, especially because of the status now that he was going to get. Like, Enter the Dragon, and made him international star. International. Everybody knew who the hell he was. Right? So my personal feeling is that he would have just done that. He would have turned away from the distraction and recommitted himself more to more deep training. Right? So you can take that for what it's worth. It's just my opinion. It's meaningless, right? If you're interested in a very accurate biography of Bruce Lee, Matthew Pauly's Bruce Lee: A Life, he actually talks about that how he was a frequent pot smoker and he experimented with acid and other hallucinogens. And James Coburn, who was a famous actor at the time, was one of his students. And James Coburn regularly used LSD, which is lysergic acid dithylamide, commonly known as LSD, and known colloquially as acid, Lucy, potent psychedelic drug, right? So, and here's the thing, when James Coburn got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, he went through a complete detox, stopped doing drugs, not even caffeine, to try and like combat his physical ailments, right? So Steve McQueen, who was also a student and close friend of Bruce Lee's, and he was an A-list celebrity at the time, they referred to him as the king of cool, right? And his ex-wife's memoirs alleged that he used cocaine regularly and pot and all that sort of stuff. So these were the people that like he was affiliated with. So again, shouldn't surprise anybody that, you know, part of that Hollywood lifestyle, that this stuff he was exposed to it and was participating in it, right? And the impression I get was that had he not died, that his intention was to get away from all that, and if he secured that international A-list celebrity status, he would have been able to do that, right?
It would have been a smart move, in my opinion. It would have been interesting to see like where he would have went with all of this, because if you think about people who die in Hollywood, it's typically considered like the top tier people. They're partying, they die. I've heard rumors that like the aspirin story was a cover up for his behavior, but at the same time, it's not like people didn't know about it.
Right,
it was already accepted.
Right. So my view of it is that we'll never know.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Right. And so instead of focusing on what might have been or what could have been or what potentially had happened, I focus on the other stuff, the stuff that I find more fascinating about him, what he was able to do as a single individual, that he had this air and charisma. He electrified everywhere he went. He was engaging and exciting to be around. And I think that's what's kind of important about who he was. Not the fact that, like, you know, Betty Ting Pei openly admitted to having an affair with him, or that he was using drugs, or any of that stuff. I don't think any of that stuff is as important as what he was able to accomplish, right? And think of the climate in the time where, you know, like, Hollywood was closed to non-whites, basically, right? Like, even black performers had difficulty, like, getting real traction in Hollywood at the time. It's not that Hollywood was racist. It's just that, like, they were pandering to like to their own ideas of what would generate the most revenue. And then here's this guy who basically comes out of nowhere, and with pardon the expression, a 1-2 punch, just basically turns Hollywood on its ear, and then has the potential to be somebody internationally with the kind of acclaim that Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger had, right? And still to this day, I advocate for Bruce Lee. He was a badass motherfucker, and all the accolades are well earned and deserved. He was not a fucking slouch. And if you want to, like, turn your nose up at him, like Quentin Tarantino, like, who had an axe to grind with him for whatever fucking reason, I love Quentin Tarantino movies, just to be clear, right? But Quentin Tarantino liked all the Bruce exploitation movies and didn't like Bruce Lee's movies. It's like, you know, and he's famous for on the Joe Rogan podcast telling everyone to suck a dick. Like he understood that, like, if anyone had the axe to grind with him, it was Bruce Lee's daughter and his ex-wife. But I'm like, you know, maybe Quentin Tarantino needs to go suck a dick or something like that. All I would say is this, is that he informed a significant portion of the way I look at life. And that this idea, my idea of self-mastery is derived directly from the things that he was doing. And he did. And like any human, none of it was easy. It was always work, and it was a struggle. And it seemed to me that had he been given enough time, I'm confident he would have been able to overcome all the stuff that he was confronted with. Right? So
he seemed like he was in a prime place for that. Like, he was getting big. Maybe he had this sense of awareness that he needs to get away from drugs, because he wrote about it, but at the same time, we don't know if he would have gone away from it.
Again,
he seems like he's set up for, like, this pivotal role that's, like, even more iconic than what he is now, and he's like a fucking Superman of his time.
Was still a Superman to this day.
Right.
I think about, again, we just touched on this earlier, but think about how often his likeness, his entire demeanor and presentation has been borrowed or straight up ripped off. Look, you love the Marvel Comics movies, the character Shang-Chi. He was in the 70s. It was Marvel Comics rip-off of Bruce Lee. Right? The entire character was generated as a result of the notoriety and popularity of Bruce Lee at the time, right? So again, not to take anything away from, I love Shang-Chi comics. I have a bunch of them. I loved reading them. I loved everything Bruce Lee and Bruce Lee inspired, most stuff, right? So for me, it was the perfect homage to him.
I think that's really important, because he does have these characteristics that should be brought forward, even if you disagree with, like, being, like, into Hollywood or being into, like, that sort of culture.
Right.
But, like, he still has that characteristic of that kind of, I want to say, like, he's a manly man, but this guy had this idea of, like, oh, I can continue myself in such a way that I'm uniquely me, and I'm unavoidable because of it. Not to be abrasive, it's just I'm there and it's hard to ignore.
I agree. Like I said, it's not a stretch to say that I love what he did, right? And therefore, by extension, I love him, even though there's somebody that I never met, who I'll never meet, I'll never interact with. But to me, he really did. It was a potent influence in my life, so I don't apologize for that. I'm going, like, so if you think I'm a sycophant, I'm not. I'm not a fanatic, right? But I recognize how much of an influence through time that he was, not just on the world at large, but on my world, right? So for me, I'm not troubled by the fact that he was human. I like the fact that he was flawed.
Is there anybody going, like, he's a reptile, he's a reptilian?
I don't think so. But like I said, there are some detractors. But I'm going, like, you can say whatever you want, but I bet you in another 50 years, people will still be talking about it. Right?
Yeah, I think so too. Like, we're a couple of years apart for sure, but growing up, I've even seen characters on TV that are, like, directly Bruce Lee inspired. There's this one, Rock Lee, and there's this infamous scene. He's standing on top of this statue, and he's about to fight somebody, and he drops his leg weights that have been covered up by, like, these very like 80s kind of sweat
Leggings.
socks. Yeah, leggings. Yeah, so he takes those off, drops them, and giant clouds come up. You hear a big crashing noise, and like it's like, for me, that was like, oh my god, this cartoon character is like the strongest. And it was very iconic in its own way, but it was all in reference to Bruce Lee, the original.
Well, and again, you can think of like from Mortal Kombat, the character of Liu Kang,
Yep.
right? Totally modeled after Bruce Lee, and again, I think and honors him well, right? So it's freaking everywhere, like or he is everywhere, and he's been such an influence that I don't think that can be ignored. So you can turn your nose up at him or ignore him as much as you want, but like I said, I don't think he's going away anytime soon. And I think in 50 years, people will still be talking about him, right? Yeah, you could do a whole lot worse than aspiring to be like him.
Yeah, he created his own formal system for a martial art. Like,
Well,
that's
but
impressive
it was
in its own.
right. But again, it wasn't because the way of no way
Yeah.
was his view of it, that you didn't he talked about crystallization. Like he was a fan of Jiddu Krishnamurti, whose work I love, he was a modern day educator and philosopher who actually passed in the 80s, but who was well known at that time in California because he lived in Ojai, California, and Bruce Lee read his works, right? So so this idea that like if you create this formal ideology, that it's a crystallization, and that crystallization constrains the individual.
Logically, it would, of course.
Right. So his view was then, instead of it being about very specific techniques, that what you did was you cherry picked the very best techniques from everything that you're exposed to, and then you formulate your own system of doing it, and you come at it from this position where it was more like approach to training, that you want to be able to, like, there's no such thing as defensive action. There's only, like, it's either you're attacking or you're being attacked, right? So to me, I think it's that kind of thinking that's going to keep going forward, that's going to keep promoting his name well into the future, right? I mean, look, 50 years after he died, and we're still talking about him.
Well, he has this mesh of like East and West, but he also has this this mesh of like the traditional Eastern philosophical teachings, and I feel like he brought it in a way that's uniquely him, because he doesn't omit things in these movies where he's saying profound things. He's using tradition and the moment to like to find himself. Like it's almost like in the movies he's talking like this guy who's having a battle for himself. Like,
well, he used to when he talked about his movies. One of my favorite interviews that he gave, and one of the few, was on the Pierre Berton show. So this would have been from like 72, just before he died. And he talked about movies, particularly that because it's a visual medium, and his particular genre, which was action, that needed to be the focus of the movie, right? So that, again, he very successfully was able to translate that to celluloid. How energetic he was and how charismatic he was was able to successfully convey that on film, right? So again, it speaks to what he was doing, that he was doing exactly what he should have been doing.
Yeah, I swear there's a video of him like talking about being precise, about being direct, the flow.
Yeah,
and it's like this beautiful performance. It's like
even a lot of the books that have been attributed to him were just a compilation of his notes that were kind of compiled together and then published, right? And his daughter runs his estate, so she's in control of his likeness and stuff. One of my favorite commercials from the 90s was for iced tea, brisk iced tea. And they used stop motion animation, and they had the stop motion animated Bruce Lee like doing crazy stuff and everything. So like I said, he's literally everywhere, and I don't think that's gonna change anytime soon. And I like that, right?
I think we're going to see like different variations of him.
Well, apparently there's gonna be there's a biopic that's been authorized by his daughter, and then potentially an animated series
Well, I meant
where he's
culturally. We're going to see like more of him around us because
I think so too. He's going to become part of the legend of whatever Western society is.
well,
Right?
there's this push in like MMA recently to do like bare knuckle boxing. They have there's a lot of people who commentate on like the history of MMA, how it's like you have your Royce Gracie, well, the Gracie family,
Right.
all these people that contributed to this idea that you could have judo, standing, like boxing. You could have Muay Thai, and I've never seen Jeet Kune Do used or Wing Chun used, but I think that's
But
like the next evolution of MMA.
there are guys in MMA who come from traditional martial arts backgrounds like Wing Chun and Muay Thai and karate. George St. Pierre.
No,
Right?
no, no. I'm not saying.
I'm just saying that okay. What are you
I'm
saying?
saying Jeet Kune Do specifically, Wing Chun. I
Yeah,
haven't seen.
but again, Jeet Kune Do's not. It's not a training system. It's a way of training.
Right.
It's not a training system.
I've never
Whereas-
seen anybody like formally say like, I've studied Jeet Kune Do, like his way of learning.
Well,
Not like his methods, but his way of learning.
Dan Inosanto, I think, is the only recognized or formal Jeet Kune Do instructor, and then he's authorized other Jeet Kune Do instructors. So I don't know how much of a network Jeet Kune Do has, like in terms of like the karate. Most karate systems have an association. That's an overarching kind of thing. I don't buy into any of that stuff. It's all the institutions. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm only interested, to me, I'm only interested in what I've always only ever been interested in, the training, right? So I'm interested in evolving my training and to continue training. And, you know, I'm 58 now, and I have successfully spent the majority of my adult life training. Now, to what end? For me, it was just something that I did out of a love for doing it. I don't over analyze why I'm doing it or how meaningful and purposeful it is anymore. I go way past that. I'm just glad that I can physically still do it. So for me, every time I put on gloves or anytime I go through the wooden dummy form, or you do any of the weapons forms or katas or kickboxing drills, any of that stuff, I'm just happy to be doing it. To me, that's my happy place. That's what I love, right? And anyone listening to this, you can learn to love it too, right? Just gotta show the fuck up. Can I get a time check?
Yep, we're 1 hour and 42 minutes in.
I'm not sure if there's anything more we're saying about Bruce Lee beyond what we've already stated.
Well, we have the obligatory outro.
But before we actually step into that, one last time, I would recommend highly that if you're interested in this stuff at all, any of this stuff, that you look at the YouTube channels of like the Kung Fu Genius, Golden Bell Training, Sensei Seth, Jesse Enkamp. All these guys are just super interesting, and they present the martial arts in an accessible way and provide insights that you might not otherwise have. And I strongly recommend, I made the argument before, I think the martial arts should be an integral part of every education, and that it's not optional, it's mandatory, right? That's my view. But I don't get to make those decisions. But for those of you watching, find a good school, commit to training, you won't regret it, right? So, having said all that, is there anything else you'd like to include? Or one last time? In closing, I would like to say, Question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance, seek knowledge, seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker, right? Self-mastery is your purpose. It is the way. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.